So we got to get into the Eagles as this is the first day they're preparing for the start of the regular season. We got 53-man rosters coming up this weekend. Speaking of 53-man rosters, the man who got the most 53 men right last year of all the Eagles beat writers, Ryan, is joining us at the Boardwalk Honda Hotline right now.
That's exciting. He's on every day, isn't he?
He is on the Sports Bash.
That's
4
good.
o'clock. He writes for 97.3 ESPN.com.
Oh, wow.
He is our Eagles and NFL Insider. John, I believe you got 52 and 53 right last year. Is that correct?
That is correct. And you know what that got me?
Who'd you miss?
That got me. I missed Dylan Gordon. So I was Dylan Gordon away from perfection.
Damn Dylan Gordon.
That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen this year. I'm not nearly as confident.
Are you predicting a 53 for 53?
No, I'm not. As I said, I'm not nearly as confident this year, partially because of the injuries, and there's some issues you got to figure out because Alshon Jeffrey's not going to be ready week 1, but he's going to be on the roster.
Right.
So how does that affect the wide receiver and tight end position? And then you have these issues on the offensive and defensive line where the Eagles are so deep. It's almost I had them keep going very heavy on both lines, and because at the end of the day, I think you should keep your best players, and we'll see how the Eagles sort of go about it.
You know, John, we should probably get you like a WWE belt or something for that for last year. But anyway, so moving forward, before we start looking ahead to the 53-man roster and looking ahead to the start of preparation week, because the Eagles play next Thursday, so they got a lot to get in the next few days. But starting with last night, I know fourth preseason game is not sexy, but to me, probably the thing that stood out to me the most from last night's game, if you can call it a game, was the fact that the progress that Jordan Mailata has made from practically tripping over himself at the start of training camp and mini camps during the offseason to what he did the last 2 games of the preseason. The growth of this guy is incredible as his development as a tackle, and you got to give the Eagles credit in their finding him and developing him. It's just been impressive.
Well, he has been, I think, much better than anyone could have expected. And, you know, on the other hand, you got people with big names in this industry. Former offensive lineman Brian Baldinger comes to mind. Ross Tucker comes to mind, who have the guy in Canton. I don't think that's fair. He remains a developmental prospect. I think he's a good one. But I think there's a long way. He's still very raw. Remember, he's playing against guys who are going to be working at UPS in the next couple of weeks. They're not going to be in the NFL. There's no Everson Griffins out there, Von Millers, Khalil Macks. I mean, the Eagles are not dumb. They're not going to put him out there against that type of pass rusher because things would be ugly. What he does have is tremendous natural athleticism to go along with prototypical size and strength. So you hope you can develop that over the next year or 2. But these people saying, hey, I don't care how many years Brian Baldinger played in the NFL or Ross Tucker. They know darn well this kid's not ready to play right now. And I don't know why they're putting these unrealistic expectations on him, because I don't think they're fair, number one. And the bigger aspect is you're never going to be proven wrong because he's not going to play, because the Eagles are not that dumb. But they are going to keep him on the roster in sort of that developmental aspect. And they hope when Jason Peters finally does retire and he's going to Canton, they hope at that time, whether that's 2 years down the road or maybe 3 years down the road, at that point, maybe he'll be ready to play.
John, talk about what you saw from local product Joey Callahan last night. He had a nice touchdown drive to end that preseason game. Talk about what you saw, and did he do enough to possibly hang around for the practice squad?
Well, I think it was a great moment for him.
Yeah.
Obviously, from being near the area, and it was pretty clear that, I mean, by the way the Eagles went about it, he started the game, then left, and then came back to win it. I mean, they didn't want to go winless in this preseason. He was able to lead the scoring drive. But, I mean, I think in realism, it ends there.
Yeah.
He's not going to be on the practice squad. He just doesn't have that kind of potential. The Eagles are extremely deep at that position. They don't need somebody on the practice squad. And I think the only guy they were looking at for that type of role is Christian Hackenberg because of the arm talent. And then what we just talked about with my lot of the measurables, as opposed to Joe, who just doesn't have that.
One last time, John. Christian Hackenberg last night was awful, to put it kindly. So, last thoughts on him. And
how about those wheels, though? Come on.
Yeah, those wheels.
Athleticism.
Absolutely. I mean, he's a pure athlete. That's what I was trying to tell you the other day. But talk about what you saw from him last night and what the future holds in general for him.
Well, I think he came in so late. Part of it was unfair, but yeah, I mean, he did not play well. There were a couple passes, obviously, where you cringe, and that's been Christian Hackenberg. But he was also let down at times. He made a good throw, for instance, that Billy Brown kind of alligator-armed in the middle of the field. If he catches that, the one interception happens right after it. Who knows? That maybe that doesn't happen. And he did. I'm joking about it, but he did show really good athleticism and with his ability to move around with his legs. And I think people don't realize that because he's so big. He's the kind of guy, and I said it before, he's going to get, if he wants to continue, he's going to get chances elsewhere. I don't know if he's not going to make the practice squad, I don't believe, but ultimately another team will give him an opportunity to come to camp next year if he wants. He can play in one of the minor leagues that will be starting up soon because he has those measurables.
John, Brent Selleck officially announces his retirement, one of the all-time Eagle greats, hanging it up. Talk about Brent Selleck's career and his time with the Eagles.
Well, it's always kind of rare now in today's sports world, not just the NFL, where you see somebody play a decade with one organization. And Brent was a really good player for a really long time. And he goes out on top. You can't put the punctuation any better on a career. I know he visited Detroit. Claims he had a couple other teams that were interested and decided he just didn't want to play anywhere else. He wanted to go out with his entire career with Philadelphia. That will only make him more popular to this fan base. And he's one of those guys who was just sort of looked upon as what people want Philadelphia Eagles to be as far as his work ethic and as far as his loyalty to this organization. So he'll always have a soft spot in the hearts of the people here. And you can't go out any better than he's going out.
John, last year special teams was solid, one of the best, if not the best, in all of the NFL. A big part of that, as much as people laugh about it or don't want to hear it, is the punter, Donnie Jones, who ended up retiring, and now Cameron Johnston is inevitably his replacement. Talk about what you saw from him this preseason and how much of a gap is there between him and Donnie Jones and what you'll see this year.
Well, I don't think the Eagles special teams was up to par to where they normally are since Dave Phipp came here. And really that was under Chip Kelly. Since Dave has been here, they've always been sort of a top-tier special teams unit, and they took a step back. That was probably the most disappointing part of a Super Bowl season. Part of it had to do with Darren Sproles' injury, so the return game wasn't as good as it normally is. Then you lose Chris Maragos in season, so the coverage teams from that point forward weren't as good. But probably the steadiest part of it all was Donnie Jones.
Yeah.
That kind of defined him as a player. He was just extremely, extremely steady. And now you're going young, and you're going young for a couple reasons. Cameron Johnson has a huge, huge leg. I mean, he can just, if you're asking him to kick it down Broadway, you've seen it already. I think he had a 67-yarder, an 81-yarder. The issues are with directional punting. And when you have to sort of pin a team down inside the 20, he's been up and down. The Eagles have been working with him throughout the preseason in that, trying to get him better. And that's going to be a work in progress. Ultimately, I think it'll work out really well, but you probably are going to have some struggles early, and he's not going to be nearly as consistent as Donnie was.
John McMullen joining us as he does each and every day here on the Sports Bash on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. You can follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen for all of your Eagles news all year long. John, today starts the official first day of preparations for the regular season, which means no Nigel Bradham for game one of the season. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the week. It's going to be a very interesting situation than preparing for at least one game without him. But I think that one game is going to reveal a lot about the linebacker depth, because last year they were pretty lucky. They had Michael Kendricks already in-house when Jordan Hicks went down. You don't have a Kendricks here anymore, as the primary backup is going to be either Camus Grugier-Hill or Nate Gary. So kind of talk a little bit about your perspective on the backup linebacker situation, having to fill in for Nigel Bradham, who we could argue is one of the key pieces of the defense last year.
Yeah, very key piece, and you could argue he might be the most underrated player on that defense. And what he did, we talk about Michael Kendrick stepping in, and Michael did a tremendous job, but I think people don't realize what Nigel had to do, and the fact that he moved over to Jordan Hicks's position. It wasn't Michael Kendricks replacing Jordan Hicks, it was that shuffling, and Nigel was the one who handled the communication aspect and all of that, which is obviously very important to the defense. So he's a Jim Schwartz favorite. He always has been, dating back to Buffalo. Nobody understands this defense better than he does, and it's going to be difficult, but it's only 1 week, and that's the positive, because remember, Nigel was originally suspended for 6 games, so it could have been much, much worse, because I wouldn't want to be sitting here talking about Camus or Nate Gary replacing Nigel Bradham for 6 games. For 1 game, even against a really good offense like Atlanta, worst case scenario is you don't play very well and you move on in week 2. But to have been forced to do that for 6 games would have been tremendously difficult. And obviously, so from that standpoint, you have to look at it like the Eagles got a big break.
Could the Eagles be focusing heavily on the waiver wire when it comes to linebackers? Because we already know the depth is an issue without Paul Warlow. He's out for the year with his knee injury. He happened this offseason. So, you know, when we see all these waves and cuts happening over the next 36 to 48 hours, could the Eagles be zeroing in on what linebackers get cut?
Yeah, they could, but remember, I explained yesterday on the show, they're 32nd of 32 when it comes to waiver claims. So if they see another linebacker they think might get waived, they're going to be last on the list. And generally, when you're interested in a player, somebody else probably is as well. So I don't think waivers are going to be all that important for the Eagles this season, simply because they are last. So it's going to be difficult for them to get players. I think it's interesting. You talked about our 53-man pool, and of all the beat writers that are in it this year, and that's another bad part of winning, you have to accumulate the standings for the next year. Of all the guys who handed in their predictions to me last night, The only position we had a consensus on was linebacker, and that might be the weakest position on this team.
Wow.
But every single one of us had the same 5 linebackers. Remember, Nigel's not going to be on the 53 to start, so it's Jordan Hicks, it's Camus, it's Nate Gary, it's Joe Walker, it's Leroy Reynolds. Every single one of them had that, and it's just not a very good group. When you're talking about Joe Walker being a consensus guy, you got some issues at that particular position.
Yeah. Joe Walker, Chip Kelly favorite, right, John?
Well, he's from Oregon, so of course he's a Chip Kelly favorite. And, Joe is – I don't want to disparage him. He's a middle linebacker. He's really the only backup middle linebacker they have. So when you have a player like Jordan Hicks who's had significant injury issues, you need a backup Mike linebacker. But, again, you brought up Paul Warlow. That's his spot. I mean, that's a guy who could seamlessly play middle linebacker and weak side linebacker, go back and forth, good special teams player, ton of starts in this league. That's a bigger injury than people realize.
John, Doug Peterson was asked this last night, and I want your thoughts on this. He was asked, do you have to make these decisions a little quicker because of the game on Thursday? And I want your thoughts. How much does this impact the team? It's already Friday. They have a game Thursday. They have to make all these cuts. They're going to spend time on that, and then they have to have a quick turnaround on starting to prepare for the Atlanta Falcons.
Well, I think it's difficult, and I think a short week always presents issues. But you have to remember, from their standpoint, they only have one opponent, and that one opponent has the same issues and has to go on the road. So at least the Eagles get to play at home. And then by week 2, it all evaporates because you have extra time to prepare. So, yeah, it is difficult, but the Eagles aren't complaining about it, nor should they, because the reason they're in this game is because they won the Super Bowl. So they would trade that for maybe being a little time crunched when it comes to the roster and it comes to practice. Because remember, they have to start practice on Sunday, and that's the day you're putting your practice squad together, because 4 o'clock Saturday is the deadline for the 53. Then you have to wait for people to pass through waivers and then start cobbling together your practice squad, who in theory you need to practice. I mean, they're part of the practice and the whole situation, and there'll be some of the guys on the scout team that are going to emulate what Atlanta does. So that's how quickly this thing happens. But as I said, remember, the Falcons have to go through the same thing.
John, I got a couple of questions for you about the National Football League as a whole. The Aaron Donald news came down today. He is getting $87 million guaranteed. It's very interesting, that number, John, because one of the things about the NFL has been there's this huge financial gap between the quarterbacks and the non-quarterbacks. Well, Aaron Rodgers got $103 million guaranteed. If Donald's getting $87 million guaranteed, I think that says that we're closing the gap between the quarterbacks and the non-quarterbacks, at least a little bit closing the gap.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we are. I mean, if you look at the structure, remember, agents are want to spin these things as best they can. Now, this is a tremendous contract for a defensive player. We all knew it was going to happen. Aaron just didn't want to go through training camp. He doesn't need training camp, and he'll be there. But remember, you have these terms that are sort of redundant and, for instance, fully guaranteed. Well, the reason that exists, it's not a redundancy. From a grammatical standpoint, it's wrong, but in the NFL, fully guaranteed isn't the same as guaranteed. And when you hear about that $87 million, well, really only about 50 is fully, completely guaranteed. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of how they spin it in the media to make themselves look better, and I'm talking about the agents. Still the highest paid defensive player of all time. But when you talk about quarterback contracts, they're still a step above, and they should be. I mean, Kirk Cousins got the first fully guaranteed contract in NFL history for a veteran. Remember, rookies are essentially first-round picks are essentially fully guaranteed, but those are for a much lesser stipend. So they've made far more gains, and they'll continue to do that, and they should, because it's by far not only the most important position in the NFL, it's arguably the most important position in sports. That's just the way quarterback is. So when you hear Odell Beckham was one of them, he wanted to be the highest paid player in football. Aaron Donald has this contract now. It's just not going to happen for them because the positions aren't as valuable as the quarterback position.
We got two other holdouts still going on, and it looks like there's no resolution in sight, though. Earl Thomas in Seattle, Khalil Mack in Oakland. Do you think either of those situations will be resolved anytime soon? Because I'm assuming right now that I don't think Earl Thomas is ever playing in a Seahawks uniform again. I think he's probably getting traded from everything I've read. And Khalil Mack, it seems like that the divide between the Raiders and Mack is probably the size of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, that's a strange one because I think John Gruden's involved, and I don't think anybody knows exactly what's in John Gruden's mind. I would have bet the farm on Aaron Donald coming in right before week one, and that's what happened. From a logic standpoint, you would have said the same thing with Khalil Mack, except that, as I said, John Gruden's involved, and nobody kind of understands what he wants, how much power he yields over Reggie McKenzie. It's pretty clear he got significant power, and he doesn't seem all that enamored. He's always been an offensive guy, always been obviously obsessed with quarterbacks, and for whatever reason, he doesn't seem to understand the value of an edge rusher like that in the NFL. So I think that complicates things. And, yeah, with Earl Thomas, I think it's part of both sides. You can go all the way back to remember there was that video of Earl Thomas telling Jason Garrett to come get him.
Right.
Obviously a Texas native, always wanted to play for the Cowboys. I think there's part of that he wants out as much as the Seahawks want to move on. But I think there's also part of the mentality that from Seattle's standpoint, who I think is going to be a better team than people think, they're still really good. To give up on a player sort of a year earlier is better than a year late. And I kind of think he started the descent. Not saying that's completely true, but I think if they do make up and they do have the all-pro Earl Thomas, I think Seattle's got a chance to surprise a lot of people. So that's a bit of a head-scratcher as well.
Follow on Twitter at JF McMullen, the reigning, defending predictor of the Eagles' 53-man roster. We'll see how John does this weekend.
I can only say that for one more day, so I'm glad you got it in.
Well, I'm here to help you out where I can, John.
Thanks, Josh.
But seriously, folks, follow John on Twitter for all your Eagles NFL coverage at JF McMullen and all of his work at 97.3 ESPN.com. John, I know you'll be busy this weekend, but I still hope you have a great Labor Day weekend.
Thank you, guys. You too.